Labas vakaras. Girdėsim? Labas vakaras. Šiandien mūsų pokalbis vyks anglų kalba, nes turim svečių iš užsienio. So good evening, everyone. And today our topic for this discussion is why collect contemporary art. And together with us we have Vita Zaman, who's an artist, curator, and founder of London and Vilnius-based galleries. We also have Murtaugh, an artist, curator, writer, and a consultant who's originally from Chicago and currently based in Vilnius, where he's the artistic director of Jonutyte. Also myself, my name is Jonutyte, and I'm a Vilnius-based art historian, curator, and educator. So today we're starting with a quote of a prominent art dealer and film director, Arnold Glimcher, who asserted that art is not investment. And today we discuss the reasons and methods of collecting currently active artists looking beyond speculative financial value. So I want to start this discussion by kind of going over different reasons why people start to collect contemporary art. And they're really diverse, so like starting from like aesthetic value, and people generally, like when they move to new homes, they're looking for something, artworks that will bring them daily visual joy. They're looking for a way to inspire themselves, also to provoke thoughts and ideas. And there is also a certain percentage of people who do collect art because they are looking to invest, and they do expect the value of the artworks to rise over time, which we cannot deny. So my first question is, like, from collectors you've encountered during your careers, what usually attracted people, first of all, to start collecting, like as a starting point? What were the reasons they started to think about it? Maybe you can start with it.
Thank you, Juste. I think the collectors I encountered, I never sold an artwork in Lithuania when I had a gallery in Vilnius. So I can't really speak about Lithuanian collectors. I only sold artwork as an artist, but not as a gallerist. Collectors that I encountered in my heyday as a gallerist were very passion-driven people. I would say most of them came from financial industries, and they were a millimeter away from gambling. I think gambling was the framework onto the world. They were hedging about everything, about an artist, about history, about economics. Is just a kind of mathematical way of calculating possibilities. But aside from that, they also were passionately in love with those artworks. So this was pre-technological explosion, so I think it was a different type of collector, and for them, physicality or matter was very important. So these were the people who were building houses, buying cars, buying artworks. So the physical aspect of ownership and controlling a set of something, right? I mean, you can't possess all the shares of Apple or, I don't know, like Google, but you can own majority of artworks by one or another artist. So I would say they were driven by pure thrill of it, the adrenaline of winning, of possessing something, of being the first, of knowing more than somebody else, and then more quiet pursuits, you know, of allowing artwork to unfold in a private space and artwork to develop very personal language. So I say that was my experience.
From my point of view, at least in my experience, I have a very different relationship with people who invest or collect art. I tend to find people who are much more interested in developing personal connection to artists and then to culture, wanting to have a direct support and direct influence on what they believe in, what they enjoy, what they want to see develop. I think at some level, many consider the value proposition, at least on some scale, but if you don't have the passion, if you don't have the kind of compulsion, which we were joking about before, there's sort of nothing there. And especially when you're working with active young or at least active artists for which a value isn't established, whether it's critical or financial, you're doing it because of a connection to the person. And I feel that's the core of anyone I've ever dealt with was, either my relationship with them and also their relationship with the artist and my relationship with the artist. So it's a transaction of relationships as much as anything.
And do you notice how sometimes, or a lot of the times, collectors start by collecting historical works of art and then they discover contemporary art? So why do you think this is, why it's not the other way around?
That's not really my experience. I think people develop an interest or they develop a knowledge or a kind of grammar for contemporary art because of the history. I think that collecting historical items, things that are already established, that exist on a layer, and I think it's a very top, 1% layer that engages in that first. But for I don't know, I hesitate to say the average because it's a very individual decision. I think it starts with just feeling really connected with someone or something and then discovering that there's a way that they can directly support it. It's not like a high bar, especially when you're working with an artist that's alive today, that's working, that's making. Anybody who just has a passion and feels a connection to that person has a chance to influence and be part of that. It's a starting point. It's the first block. You might have studied art. You might have just been very casual or just gone to museums, been a member, a supporter in any way. But it just starts with one decision.
You described a very Lithuanian situation, I think, because in a way the values post-1991 were so uneven. You could overpay for the work 200% during the auction, and meanwhile the same price buying from an exhibition or an artist would be much lower. So people felt more inclined to buy historical art because there was some legitimation of that work. In my experience from London or New York, people start with prints. They're very proud that they own a print by Picasso, which is edition of 200 or so. Then they move into photography and editions. And only then they kind of become involved enough to buy individual works. And last, they buy things that nobody else buys, so they really buy particular things that only address them and maybe support really non-material projects. So I think it's a gradual process, moving away from established names and moving towards more ambitious and more experimental projects.
I still think that that's a little bit of the tradition and the established kind of grammar, to extend the metaphor a little bit. But what, at least in my experience, and this isn't exclusive to London or any particular art market, there's quite many people that are, let's say under 40, that have studied architecture, that have studied design, that have been engaged in visual culture throughout their whole career, no matter where they are. And I think they tend to be a little more adventurous with how they engage in it. They like to engage more directly with people that are making currently. It's super generalization, but I think it's at least a trend that's expanding.
Thank you. So art collectors, we play an important role in the ecosystem of the arts. They often support emerging artists, long before institutions start to support their careers. And it's not only financially, but also, through generating attention to their work and sort of communicating about it to others. But collecting emerging artists is also considered a more risky field in a way financially. But can we talk about why it's important to collect emerging artists, even though it is a riskier field in a way? Do you want to start?
I think it's just much more pleasurable because you're actually involved in making together with an artist and gallerists and critics and curators. You're actually part of the culture. You're molding the culture. You're participating very deeply. So it gives you a sense of that you matter, that you're part of, that your voice, although not through creativity, but through support of creativity, is being heard. You're building a legacy. Again, I would say, because I love speculation myself, so this thrill aspect of is this going to be worth something 20 years later? Is this artist doing something very meaningful? Am I right? Are my instincts right? So I think that extra gambling aspect is much more satisfactory. Why emerging artists? Well, because you can afford it. Also because it's not a fake. Sometimes it's interesting to collect through auctions, in particular old masters, let's say. But and actually, in comparison to contemporary art, they are very affordable sometimes. But there is always a risk. Well, is it a real, really? So provenance, not providence, but providence also. I think it's just exciting to contribute and be part of that community. As we said, this question, why to collect? Why not collect? Because ultimately, you're part of community and you're building community. And this is fundamental need in us as humans to belong and to contribute and to communicate. So I would say that's why.
Yeah, I guess I'd respond to the issue as what is risk? I mean, and when you say risk, I think the implication it's financial risk, that you're putting your money out there like on the roulette table. There is that aspect, but it goes back to the individual relationship thing I talked about earlier. Like when you go to an exhibition of a young artist, somebody who's currently producing today, somebody from your city, somebody from your country, someone from another part of the world, you might ask yourself, how do they make this work? You are how they make it work. Like, it's your choice to participate either by supporting it through your presence or your financial backing or enacting your ethics by what it is you believe in, your belief in what they're doing. That's how that makes it work. That's what closes the loop. And it's important to realize that. And I don't think that's a risk as much as looking at it on a purely financial basis. If you develop larger collections, inevitably you will be dealing with issues of any number of issues I'm not going to get into right now. But it all starts with that personal relationship and to know that you can make a difference. I think that you mentioned this before, Vita, like this is how you can make a difference. You can get on a waiting list for a super famous artist, even if you have the money, and maybe get a work in 5 years, and you won't make any difference in that artist's life. But you can do something today to support a performer, to support a video artist, to support a young sculptor, anyone, buy one work, and it makes a huge difference.
Absolutely agree with this. So I also want, in relation to this, maybe to discuss this idea of like growing with an artist, because when you're collecting living artists, a lot of the time you will meet them early on in their career, and you can really both like observe the way that they're developing, like as a person and as an artist, and you can also, have a dialogue. And so have you observed certain cases where collectors grew together with the artists, or have you been part of that?
Well, I mean, I would never claim to be a larger part than I am. I think, we're all kind of cogs in the machine a little bit, but when people make the decision to really follow an artist and support them over a number of years, inevitably you grow together. I've seen people build their own relationship. I mean, you can look at the way collectors or foundations and like how they've approached things themselves, but almost in all cases, everyone's decided for themselves how they're going to engage with it and discovered it along the way. You don't always go with a plan or an outline or kind of a roadmap to what you're going to do. You sort of follow your nose a little bit, and one thing builds on the other. And when you meet one person, inevitably you'll meet others, and those connections will happen that can't be predicted. It's a bit of chaos, So yeah, absolutely. I think growth has got to be part of it. If you're not growing, if you're not discovering and challenging yourself, then kind of why are you involved? It's a way to question your own belief structures as much as it is to support what you already believe in. And artists grow and make new work and make new choices when they have that support, whether it's emotional or financial. Everyone will change their path.
Well, depends what you mean by growing. But in my practice, what I've seen the most successful examples of growing, of collector and emerging artists really collaborating was support by producing projects. So let's say an artist is receiving certain amount of visibility and certain amount of not necessarily popularity, but relevance. And the gallery is relatively young, and let's say there is a project in Venice or in London or wherever, in Seoul or where it might be, and just the financial investment and contribution required for something like that to pull off is significant, and a collector is visionary enough to finance such project, or sometimes even to initiate. So let's say I will give you the space and a certain budget, do whatever in my space in Miami, or my space in Venice, whatever. So this is like growing in terms of ambition together. Another thing that is happening, which is different from, let's say, a couple of decades before, we used to have these wonderful German collectors, these middle-class collectors that would buy something every year, and the prices are relatively steady, and they would collect the same artists from first show till the artist is museum-level artist. But the prices are relatively the same. Because contemporary art is so popular and so prevalent now, the prices of successful artists triple, quadruple, and expand so fast that these ethical, conservative collectors that are really involved, really are knowledgeable about the artists, they very quickly are priced out, essentially, because an artwork that costs 5,000 in 5 years, it might cost 300,000, and then it's a totally different group of people that can afford to support that artist. Of course, what happens then after 5 years, nobody wants that artist, let's say, and the prices crash. So there is that nightmare scenario also. So in theory, growing with an artist is a beautiful idea. In practice, in very hyper-stimulated markets, it's virtually impossible. And this is where it's great to have places like Lithuania, because the market is relatively conservative and slow, so you actually can afford such a luxury. So that's my experience.
Yeah, controlling the attention spike, the attention spiral is really critical. I mean, you can't control it. Things will, if you're not kind of in this sort of mutual growth society, so to speak, where kind of you're all working together, artists and collectors, and as a gallery or as a community, you're all invested in each other, whether you realize it or not, and you're all kind of at the behest of everyone else's success and failure. So understanding that, knowing that there's only so much you can control, but still looking out for each other as much as is possible, I think that's really critical. And to see it not as an individual pursuit, but as a collective one. So like if people are either through collecting or supporting, or benefactors or people backing projects, galleries at any scale, they've got to be engaged with a reason beyond just tomorrow's price quote. Because if you're just in it for that, then you're going to be disappointed. Sorry to say.
It would be good to discuss some practical questions as well. So, because a lot of the time question arises why it's good to buy from a commercial gallery if you're just starting out and you don't know. So maybe can we talk a little bit about the galleries, commercial galleries, and why it's good to buy from those?
Okay, I can truly answer that question.
Yeah.
Because it's important to support commercial galleries because they do very, very valuable work. It's totally not okay to buy directly from an artist studio, although it seems much more interesting and pragmatic and inexpensive. But art gallery is actually that producer, that distributor, that person that supports not just artists individually, but the whole cultural field, that participates in events like that promotes the artists, that generally kind of keeps the hum of culture and exchange and conversation going. So, I think commercial gallery, aside from all the practicalities that, for sure the work will be delivered to you, for sure there's a record of what's being said and done and received, it's just very, very important to support that sector of society because they are our culture gatekeepers, and on them we depend, that when we feel like a desperate need to see art on Sunday morning, that there's something to see, So they're very important players. So I think the galleries, aside from practicalities and logic, artist careers, and being the first ones to understand and initiate, they're just a very valuable part of the culture map.
I agree to a point. I think that's true. I think that galleries, there are many, and especially young upstart galleries that are doing the heavy lifting of bringing people along at an early phase and really taking a lot of risk when there's not a clear financial directive to do so. Yeah, there's a lot of that needs to be supported because it is the sort of the first platform that a lot of people get and a chance to do things, again, together that the artist wouldn't be able necessarily to do on their own. I'm without over criticizing. I just think that you need to make sure with any relationship that everyone's doing their due diligence, that everyone's involved in it equally, everyone's kind of invested in the project equally, and that's only something I can't. No one can tell you who and how that works. You have to find that out for yourself. But you'll know when you find a gallery or an artist or a kind of collective of people that clearly are supportive of one another and invest in each other's success, and where there's a chance to grow with it, and they're kind of speaking the same language as you and you're feeling part of it. I think that's something worth investing in just as a community. And that's where the value comes for working with a commercial gallery, because it's got to be, again, a little bit more than commercial. It's got to be in trading in relationships as much as objects. And there are people that don't, but that's something like in any environment, in any community, you have to find out for yourself.
Another practical question, I think, or just a question that people are generally curious about when they're starting to get into the arts is like what determines the value of the artwork? Like why certain works cost just hundreds and others, can go up to millions. So
I think there's a value and there's price. They're very different things. Something can be absolutely valuable, and artists might be so valuable for the artist he might not sell, or even for a dealer. And another thing is price. And price, I'm sorry to disappoint you, very often people ask me, are there some objective definitions of, is there an index? Yes and no. The price of an artwork is what the previous person was going to be willing to pay and what the next person is going to be willing to pay. So it's purely, it returns us where we started. Art belongs to the realm of desire. There's nothing rational about it. If I want that artwork and nobody wants to give it to me, I might offer myself, my soul, and my house, and my children's inheritance, and I might get it. So, and it's a very passionate industry, and there are cases where people really, you enter exhibition space and you see an artwork, and there is no price. They make me an offer. And so we're talking purely on the level of offers. If the offer is crazy enough to be considered. Why art is expensive? And why not? What else is expensive? Real estate or what? Shares and stocks that you can't physically touch or look at and might also collapse. Why anything is expensive? I mean, because we live in society that has phenomenon of money and we have to spend it somewhere, and it's also an exchange system. Why art is expensive? Because people spend their lives making it, And also, going back to the gallery business, because 80% of galleries barely make a living. Basically, it's a hobby. People don't make money, regardless of how hard they work. So that time where actually they do sell something, it is expensive. And aside that it's a unique object, that it's very time-consuming, very energy-consuming, it captivates us. This is what defines us as humanity. So, it's a monument. It's investment in, as very beautifully said, we invest in each other as society. So that's why it's expensive, I think.
Yeah, that's really well said, at least the difference between price and value. It's very easy to get fixated on the headlines when an artwork is valued at some massive amount or something sells on auction for a massive amount. But these are not the day-to-day mechanics of economics in art. We wouldn't be questioning the value versus the price of a valuable car, for example. Like the car might be valued at such amount of money, but that's probably not what somebody would pay for it. They would make a deal, they would make a negotiation. And the value is also a little bit of a test to see how does it engage, like what is the number at which this engages with culture? And just because it's priced at that number doesn't mean that money is immediately flowing to it. Usually it doesn't mean that. So the accumulation, the basis of a life's work, of all of the effort and time and creative building that led to that point, that's reflected, or is at least intended to be reflected as an estimate at what that means. But of course, it's also easy to get fixated on the big ones, the bigger works, the works that command a very high value or get the attention, and that's a little bit of a tactic too, because inevitably it doesn't matter if something is selling for $1 million, just to pull a number out of the air. Like, that artist is probably also offering something for much lower price, and it could be an edition or a print or something like that. But it got the attention because of the high number. So yeah, it's all kind of there's always a point for one to engage with an artist, no matter what the price or the value is and what your personal financial situation is. I think that price and value are usually a distraction from accessibility.
And do you have any advice how starting collectors should do their own research into what they should acquire?
Whatever turns you on, whatever you fall in love with, I'd say. It's a bad investment advice, but I think it's a good investment advice. I think you have to love that artwork enough, so if it's worth nothing in money price, it's worth a lot in emotional price, and you want to have it and look at it, and if it gives you joy, then get it. I could give you more advice to do with the money, but it's probably all worthless anyhow, because it's speculative and it's more trend-based. Same person that would give you investment in stock prices, there are periods when everything collapses. I would say just follow your heart and your eyes and your own personal taste, even if it's ridiculous and untouchable and uncultured. And then maybe visit some events and hang out with a good gallerist, and you'll be okay.
Yeah, something like that. I think it starts with feeling compelled. You have to put yourself out there. It's like building any relationship. You have to put yourself out there to find what finds you. And that means leaving your neighborhood, so to speak, I think, and also, exposing yourself to what's around, the context, what the discourse is, like what's happening now, not just what's happening in the museum, maybe not just what's happening in visual art, and letting your mind and letting your attention lead you where you're interested, and meeting people, talking to people, getting not feeling a distance from what's being made and what's being said, like getting involved. Because that's where it starts. Otherwise, you're kind of just looking in a catalog, or you might as well just be looking for a catalog online. I think that where the value or the adventure, the meaning of getting involved in culture at that level, but through collecting or supporting or whatever, that comes from meeting people and talking and getting to know what's behind what's being made. And that's something you can do with active artists that you can't do with historic art. You can really develop a personal understanding and a personal relationship to what's being created, and that's immensely valuable. And through that, you'll meet more people who are doing the same. Like, people with like minds, people with like philosophies, people with like ethics find each other, and they work in networks, and they tend to support each other. And it's also a really good way to meet people who share your values and share your ideas, and maybe challenge you a little bit too.
Yeah, that's really important. And actually, one of the most interesting aspects of collecting contemporary art is also that you can really help shape the future of the art world. So by choosing which artists to collect and what topics to focus on, and which visionary collectors you feel that have impacted, art history at a certain moment in time?
I would say Peggy Guggenheim, but she was a collector and a gallerist also, and of course heiress, so money was not an issue, and she was very closely involved with artists. So I think indirectly, actually, artists formed her collection. Even Marcel Duchamp was involved, Max Ernst was involved. So for me, she's in a way. For me, the best collectors actually are gallerists. Our dealers' collections usually are fabulous. They're just very silent about them because they're part of the history. They're actually the people that go to the studios and see, they're part of editing process. Then there are, mega blockbuster collections that say what you want. They are majestic also, but they're not as personal and they are kind of safe collections. So. Yes, I would vote for art dealer collections.
Yeah, I think also artists or people who studied art often have a very good relationship toward supporting what's risky, supporting what's adventurous, taking interesting chances, or at least engage in some kind of creative pursuit, including architects or people from the kind of visual culture field, musicians, that kind of thing. In terms of individuals, I don't necessarily want to identify individuals because I think it's more of a group. I think what Vita mentioned before about this prototype of like German, which traditionally German middle-class collectors, where it was accessible. It was something that you felt was kind of a civic duty almost to be involved in art, to support young artists, to have people that maybe with just a few thousand or less, would invest in someone every year and make a big difference in their life. And I think that's becoming a little bit missing because of the way we tell the story of contemporary art today, because it's a very polarized one. You either are a big collector spending millions every year, or you're buying a ticket to go to the show. And there's nothing in between. And there's, of course, much in between. There's a whole spectrum there. And there's many active current collectors that I think maybe have very specific kind of collections, maybe have very specific kind of interests, but they're really invested in it. And it's not about the amount of money. It's about the dedication and the commitment to something. And again, developing relationships, because those are the things that pay off in the long term.
Absolutely agree with that. We also wanted to talk about, more difficult media for collecting. So I wanted to ask you why so few people collect media like performance art or video art installations, and can something be done to encourage it? Or maybe, performance art should have alternative sources like crowdfunding or ticket sales or something. What's your opinion on that? Can it be encouraged, and why so few people collect it?
I think because, performance art, I'll give you a very banal explanation why certain people don't collect. How many times have you seen performance artists in Sotheby's and Christie's? Because it's an instruction pack in a way, but it's not disinterested instruction pack like Sol Levitt that draw X amount of lines. Performance art depends on the performer. So once the performer is removed, it's more difficult, I think. Are there ways to collect it? Yes, I do think there are ways, and maybe this is where NFT technology can even be useful. Somehow to facilitate, the not necessarily the instructional aspect of it, but crowdfunding, yes, that's definitely the future. Even very, very big galleries are looking into it, how to finance experience art where nobody owns it, but the experience is really overwhelming and successful. I think it's back to that, traditional definition of an artwork as an authentic set of one that you can touch, hold, hide, steal, show to nobody or to all. So I think there is a psychological drive towards the one. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and she always asks me a question, is it the last one? Is it the only one? Even if it's a cake. And I say, yes, it's the last one, and it's the only one. So I think it's so fundamental to want that.
Yeah, there's something undeniably visceral about wanting to have something physical. But at least in the case of performance and video specifically, and I have a direct relationship to these media with artists that I work with. I must admit a little bit of ignorance, a little bit, that I just didn't know at the beginning. Like, I didn't really take it as a difference. When I started working in a gallery and working with video artists, I just treated it like it was anything else. And I think you pay it with that respect, and you engage people with work just as you would, maybe a lot of people would a painting. Then of course, I mean, anything can be sold. There's always something that ties it to reality. It's not completely ephemeral. We might take it as ephemeral, but I've met enough people who either collect or have as part of their collection what we'd call ephemeral art that it's well established by this point. Like we talk about Lewitt, like this is his art history now. It may not be firmly set in art history, at least in the common parlance, but it is. And I think it's a gradual process, but we can deal with that in a lot of other areas of culture, like downloaded songs or things like that. This isn't an issue. But for art, somehow it still hangs on in a lot of people's minds, and I just don't think it is. I think if something's worthwhile to you and you're interested in it, if it's a film, if it's a performance, there's always protocols, there's always editions, there's always ways to get involved in that. There is a standard parlance, there's a standard model for doing this. It's always just depending on what your engagement is with it. Like if you want, there's a way for you to be involved, no matter how out there it seems to be. It doesn't have to be. I mean, it goes without saying, it doesn't have to be a painting, but it doesn't have to be something that just sits on your wall or is on view all the time. The value is in the making. The value is in its presence, not so much in its, presence on your wall, so to speak.
Another topic, but how has the internet changed the way we collect art? And what do you think about these changes and how it's going to impact the future of collecting?
I think it already impacted, right? So let's compare it to a love story from fairy tales. A medieval prince wants to marry a princess. Somebody sends him a slightly misrepresented portrait of a princess, and a marriage is based on that misrepresented portrait 5 years later. So when I started my art career, I was an intern at Listen Gallery in London, and my first job was to label slides. And that was a beautiful thing. The artwork maybe didn't show so well, but it took so much time, and you had to label it, when you had to send it, when the person had to look at it and think about it and maybe call you back. And so it was a very long courtship period between seeing work, looking at it, thinking about it. And I think with internet, it just became instant. You could receive a JPEG today, make a decision now, and if you don't make a decision, your neighbor, your friend, or your girlfriend might buy from in front of your nose. So it straight away kind of it became Tinder. Art world became Tinder. Essentially, very, very fast. Nobody experienced the artwork. Nobody saw how big it was or wasn't, but it looked good on the screen. So the whole generation of artworks that just simply look good on the screen became really popular. And I see that Instagram, certain artists are purely sensations on Instagram. Once you go and see that work in physicality, it's kind of disappointing. So I think internet is very good and also very bad. For certain artworks, it's very, very bad. And would I buy from a JPEG only from an artist that I know very, very well? And I think sometimes it's even dangerous to over-popularize an artwork or an artist. I think it gives this false idea that it's so accessible and so disposable and so many of everything is circulating. And you say how it will affect, we like it or not, sure, the digital space for art distribution will prevail. So NFTs, they will be there to stay.
Yeah, I think as far as the effect of the internet on culture broadly. It's such a large topic. I mean, all I can say is it has an effect. Of course it has an effect. It has a supercharging effect on exposure, on discourse, on hype, on delocalizing things. It's really hard to have kind of a localized market anywhere because everyone has access to what's happening everywhere else and you can participate in it, at least to some degree, either through viewing or, just education. It's a bit unavoidable, though. I think, yes, there are things that are made for the internet. That is a marketplace. But I think people, again, who do things for one specific area just because it looks good on Instagram, I won't say they never have value, but I think they have inherently less if there's nothing else backing it up. Because you can't build that real connection, that value that's worthwhile strictly through social media exposure. And it does provide a false sense of accessibility. Social media likes are not accessibility. Social media exposure is not accessibility. Accessibility is discourse, it's talking, it's engaging with people directly, it's engaging with the artist directly. And that doesn't happen with a like, that doesn't happen with a comment, that doesn't happen with a share, that happens with real effort. And I think maybe at least on the viewer side, how social media has affected, internet exposure has affected artists, is that it kind of provides a false sense of security that we are supporting culture by sharing and liking and putting it on Facebook and such, and this isn't it. That can't be it. We don't live and breathe and eat off of social media. That comes from somewhere, that comes from real labor and effort and personal engagement, and that doesn't happen without everyone's, or at least many people's participation.
So I think I just have a last question before we open up for the audience questions. But we sort of discussed, we touched a little bit upon it, about the research, but what advice would you give to someone wanting to support the arts or wanting to start a collection?
At this point, I still would stick to being old-fashioned, say, find a couple of gallerists, you visit their programs regularly, maybe you befriend them and ask them for advice. Maybe if you have some money, start traveling, seeing things that are also happening in the close nearby. Read something online, but read some art history too. Befriend some artists of different sorts, so preferably they would not like each other, so at least you would be exposed to different types of art. And hang out with those people, befriend them, make it your community. Don't buy until you truly love something. Don't buy because that gallery friend advised you to buy, or don't buy because your friend bought the same thing. Just spend time, and take it as a given that there will be some mistakes. Maybe you'll buy something that later you will not want or will not believe in. But just live that life, make it your hobby, not your hobby, your lifestyle.
Yeah, I think a lot of that. Learning for yourself, educating yourself, finding out what's outside your immediate environment. But I would ask anyone who's interested in engaging with culture through collecting or being a benefactor supporter of any type, what is it you like? What is it you're drawn to? And let that at least be the first step. We have to also be open to change our mind and challenge our presumptions with every step that we take. But it starts with an idea, and ideas are not fixed. Ideas can be changed. Ideas can mold and be refined over time. We shouldn't think that there's a set program, okay, if I do A, B, C, D, E, then I'll become a collector, or I'll become established in the art world, or whatever. Don't do things because other people are doing them only. That's a recipe for at least disappointment, if not failure. Do what you are drawn to, and let that first step draw you to the next, and the next, and the next. And before long, you'll have progressed quite a long way, and you'll have taken a journey that you wouldn't have been able to predict. So, yes, follow your nose a little bit, and meet good people, have good conversations, and don't follow the crowd.
Thanks, Liam. Do you guys have any questions?
Thank you. So my question is about the value or the price, I'm not sure which term to use, of contemporary artists. So for instance, Pranas Gailius is one of the most renowned Lithuanian painters, and you can buy his paintings for 5,000 euros. Then you see somebody who has just graduated from Vilnius Academy of Arts, and he asks for the same price. So how to know who to choose, whether this price actually means that he or she is really good because she's asking for the price, or should I instantly think that, okay, this person is not, their work is not going to be profitable in the future, so I should look for somebody's work that is cheap nowadays and maybe expect that in the future they will gain the price. Because nowadays, if I can choose between a no-namer and well-established names, I would choose the established ones.
So you're a safe investor. Depends how those works, what they do to you, how much they matter to you. I would say go for somebody who's, so self-confident and ask for these big prices, and why not? I would say be that first collector that supported that young artist, and maybe strike a deal. Say, okay, you can use my car, or you can stay in my place, and I can pay next year, and I'm sure you can agree at some kind of happy medium in between. I would go for that risk of an emerging artist. Of course, they might disappear, but they might not stay artists. They might, but from the pure fun side of things, I personally, because I like that, uncertainty, I would go for the young artist. Or both, maybe. Hedge your bets, that one and that one, and see what happens.
Do you give the same advice to the artist, to ask for this high price, and then...
I think artists has to feel comfortable, First of all, a lot of artists don't want to sell their work. You know why? Because it's really important to them. It's like their children. It means something. It's not some kind of, bullshit you made and that's that. So already if an artist is agreeing to sell you the work, they must trust you that you are, it's important enough as a cultural guardian for that work to be with. And that work is not just going to hang in front of your TV, which is also nice, but that you're going to promote and so on and so forth. Yeah, I would say artists know your value, know your worth. I idolize artists, so I think artists should ask for high prices because they put all their life energy into it. So yeah, I think they should ask for high prices.
I mostly agree. I think that confidence is important. Also, the market has shifted not just in Lithuania, but anywhere. We work in a global market now, and just because something might have gone for less money, or an established artist is selling for 5,000 now, and that's an established price, the market has changed. People are working in a global environment where 5,000 is not that much in London or New York or something like this. And if they have any kind of position there, that's how they're measuring themselves. That's the bar that they're looking at. I think, yes, risk and negotiation, flexibility on all sides is really important. That just because something is a price doesn't mean that you deliver it in one lump sum, or like that's how it works. There's always a way to engage. And yeah, I think, what was I about to say? I think that the value's got to come from more than just the price. Otherwise, I would sort of question, I guess the point I was going to make is actually that it's a two-way relationship, right? It's not that you hand over the money, end of transaction. The artist, the gallerist, anybody who's sort of involved in the making of it is invested in it. They have a part to play in it. And they're maybe even charging more if it's for somebody that they don't want to go to. The price is maybe set as an intentional barrier. But I think, yeah, I would look for where it would have the most meaningful effect. If somebody who's established, somebody who's well regarded in the discourse, who's in big collections already, that's great. Maybe it's valuable, but for somebody out of academy that you sell or you buy one of their first works and you're one of their first early benefactors, that has a really huge impact. And you want to work with somebody who looks at what they do on a global scale, not just on the local one.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was interested in maybe you could tell a bit more about the added value of a galleries, because in the discussion about the online Instagram market and still this traditional galleries, you said it's a part of culture, it has some added value, but can you tell a bit more about it? Because you can also see the gallery as a sort of in between two parties that can go out. Huh?
I think, there are two types of artists. One artist that loves interacting with their collectors and even, transacting the whole thing. And then certain artists just don't want to deal with collectors. They just in their own creative space, and actually the whole process that valuable artwork has the price set on it, it's already making the artist nervous. So just for purely the transactional point, where the artwork gets priced, paid for, and then delivered to the collector, a gallerist is needed, right? Or an art dealer, if not a gallerist. But this is like the most basic point. I think the more important point is that gallerist helps an artist to look at himself or herself from outside and to structure and to edit, and sometimes even advises how to conduct, that pathway through a career, what journeys to make, and from a very banal things, even, lending money or helping to get to exhibition. So it's really close relationship, and I think in Lithuania it's only the beginning, and it's only now I see galleries working like that are really invested in artists' careers. Of course, there is one prediction that in the future the gallery will be redundant, right? That artists will either function as a multinational company by himself or herself, or that auction houses will do what the gallery does. But the truth is that artists are very emotional people that need that close dialogue with the gallerist. The gallerist is more than just somebody who sells your work or represents you. It's somebody actually who gives you a lot of support in all sorts of situations. So maybe the gallerist will be replaced by artist agents, I don't know. But I somehow think it's very important for very basic creative process for the artist to have a gallerist. It's almost like somebody who communicates on their behalf with the outside world.
Yeah, I think it's got to be more than strictly a dealer. I think dealers, if galleries act as dealers, they will go extinct because that mechanic can be done and more profitably. Like very often I'll get questions from people who are not engaged with the commercial side of art and say, why does a gallery take a percentage? Like what do they do to earn that percentage? And to be fair, there are people out there who don't earn the percentage. What it has to be is something more than just the strict sales or connection to finance. It's got to be an advisor, it's got to be a supporter, it's got to be somebody who helps make things happen, a friend. I mean, it's not the same for everyone, and I'm not saying that everyone's got to be best friends with everyone in their group, but if it's not coming from something like that, from something beyond just the pure transactional value, then it will go extinct. So people have to find new ways to engage, and they're not even new, they're old ways of engaging. It's actually the more traditional way of engaging. You have to build community, and that can be scary for some people. And it's not always a straight line or a straight increase. But the galleries, the artist groups with galleries that I really admire have gone through bumps, have gone through difficult periods, but come out usually better or more interesting on the other side. And that's when it becomes essential. Because if it's only like we were talking before about the difference between an art handler and an art dealer, or art dealer in a gallery. And yeah, a dealer, if you're thinking about it purely as dealing, there are all kinds of internet-based mechanical models that can and potentially will replace you. You have to do more than that. And I think that comes from being kind of prior engaged in the culture, like as an artist, as a curator, or whatever, having some experience in the field to know what people actually want, or at least have an idea. I don't think we ever know, because as you say, it's not just that artists specifically are generally emotional, it's just they're individuals, and you have to respond to who they are and what they need, and it's not the same for each one. So that responsiveness, that kind of human touch, that can't be replaced.
So thank you for being with us today. And thank you, Vita and Liam, for a great talk. Thanks. Ačiū.